Screw this family and their golden boy fantasy. I'm Claire Anderson, ex-hotel exec, loyal daughter, and the woman who gave up everything to rescue our dying lodge. But trust me, this isn't a story about gratitude. It's about betrayal, stolen titles, and the day I bought our biggest rival just to watch my brother's empire crumble from across the street. What do you mean Ryan will be CEO? The words slipped out sharper than I intended, echoing off the polished stone walls of the newly renovated lobby. My voice, usually calm, composed, bounced back at me with a sting I couldn't ignore. I stood in the heart of Mountain Pine Lodge, surrounded by decor I had personally curated, handcrafted light fixtures, warm wooden textures, touches of mountain charm that spoke of heritage and modern hospitality. This place was more than a hotel. It was my heart, meticulously designed, sacrificed for, and brought back to life. And yet here I was watching it slip through my fingers. Mom waved dismissively, her smile tight and patronizing. "Claire, honey," she said, like I was 12 again, not a 52-year-old woman with 2 decades in the hospitality industry. "Your brother has more natural leadership ability. You're too detail-oriented." Too detail-oriented? That's what saved this hotel. Before I could respond, Ryan strolled in with that all-too-familiar swagger, hands buried in his pockets, that smug grin plastered across his face. "Hey sis," he smirked. "Don't take it personally. Someone's got to handle the day-to-day while I focus on the big picture." I bit my tongue so hard I could taste copper. They had made their decision. After 20 years of climbing the ranks in Chicago, managing high-end properties and leading expansion projects, I had come back to Colorado to rescue the family hotel from bankruptcy. Sold my condo, cashed out my savings. Spent nights running numbers and days elbow-deep in renovation projects. My blood, sweat, and every spreadsheet were in this place. And they handed it over to him, to the brother who'd never kept a job longer than a year, whose idea of networking was drinking overpriced craft beers at breweries in Denver. I looked around the room. The staff was gathering for the meeting. Sarah, our head housekeeper, caught my eye. Her gaze was heavy, knowing. She had worked here for 20 years. She knew. They all did. I was supposed to present our record-breaking quarterly earnings today. Instead, I'd be standing by while Ryan gets paraded in as the hotel's savior. What was all this for? "Claire," Mom said again, softening her tone now, "try to see the bigger picture. This is still your family. We're just trying to give Ryan a chance. Give Ryan a chance. And me? What was I given? A job title without decision-making power? A hollow thank you? A front-row seat to watch my work dismantled?" I felt the burn behind my eyes and willed it to stay there. No tears, not here, not now. "My name is Claire Anderson. I'm 52 years old, and I'm finally realizing that family doesn't always mean fairness, that sometimes the people you love the most will never fully see you. But if I've learned anything from 2 decades in the hotel industry, it's that appearances are everything." So I smiled. "Of course," I said, voice even. "Let's give Ryan his chance." The meeting was a blur. Applause, congratulations, Ryan's grandiose plans for streamlining guest engagement and leveraging tech for efficiency. None of it made sense. Most of it contradicted everything that had just brought us success. Still, I smiled. Later that night, I found myself alone in the manager's office, the same office my dad once used, now filled with my folders, my systems, my vision. I closed the door, sat down, and let the silence settle. Is this really happening? How do you fight for something when the people around you don't want you to win? How do you prove your worth to those who've already decided you don't have any? I sat for a long time, staring at the financial reports I'd prepared. The numbers didn't lie, but apparently they didn't speak loud enough either. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Maria, our senior housekeeper. "I just wanted to say," she said gently, "you're the reason we're still here. I hope you know that." I smiled, but my throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." When she left, I turned off the lights, the soft glow from the hallway casting shadows across the room. Maybe it was time to start thinking about something else. Something mine. On the drive home, I passed the old Riverside Lodge, the once bustling competitor now left to rot. A "for sale" sign sat crooked in the front lawn, its edges fraying from the mountain wind. I slowed down, parked, and sat there staring at the empty shell of a place I used to admire as a kid. And suddenly I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. I grew up in these halls, the smell of fresh pine, the clatter of suitcases rolling across stone floors, the low hum of conversation over breakfast. That was the soundtrack of my childhood. Mountain Pine Lodge wasn't just a family business. It was my second home. While other little girls played house with dolls, I was behind the check-in counter, watching Mom charm guests and Dad juggle maintenance emergencies with duct tape and good humor. I used to sneak into the laundry room just to fold towels with Maria. Back then, everything felt simple. Safe. It's strange, isn't it? How the places that once made you feel loved can turn into spaces that make you feel invisible. Was it always like this? Did I just not notice? In college, I chose hospitality management without hesitation. It felt natural. I had lived it my whole life. By 22, I had moved to Chicago, eager to carve my own path. Excited, terrified, alive. I started at the bottom. Front desk. Graveyard shift. I smiled through rude guests and broken coffee machines. I learned. I grew. And when I got promoted, first to operations, then to regional, I didn't feel proud. I felt guilty. "Don't forget your roots," Mom would say during our monthly calls. "When are you coming home?" Dad asked once, as if success only mattered if it happened within arm's reach. And then there was Ryan. 3 years younger. Restless. Charming in that infuriating way that made people forgive him too easily. He flitted from major to major, architecture, marketing, photography, then dropped out to figure things out. While I was managing staff rosters and guest complaints, he was posting latte art from cafes in Denver, talking about his next big idea. Mom always defended him. "He's just creative," she'd say. "He'll find his spark eventually." And me? I was the dependable one, the planner, the fixer. I showed up, I delivered. And it was never quite enough. I still remember the night Dad called, his voice tight with panic. "Claire, we're in trouble. The hotel, it's weeks away from defaulting. We didn't want to worry you, but..." I didn't even let him finish. I was on a plane within a week, sold my condo, packed up 20 years of life in a single weekend. The thought of losing Mountain Pine crushed me. It was more than nostalgia. It was legacy. Identity. The place that raised me. God, that first month. What a mess. The carpet reeked of mildew. The reservation system was something out of the Stone Age. Online reviews called the place outdated, chaotic, not worth the price. Staff morale was non-existent. And the guest satisfaction scores? I couldn't even look. I threw myself in. 12-hour days became the norm. Fixing broken sinks, interviewing new staff, negotiating with local vendors. I designed a new logo myself at 2 a.m. on my laptop while eating leftover Thai food. "Claire, you need to slow down," Sarah told me one night, watching me reupholster lobby chairs with a staple gun in hand. I laughed. "I'll sleep when we hit 80% occupancy." She shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible." But little by little, things changed. We brought in locally sourced furniture, updated the linens, introduced eco-friendly amenities, staff training sessions every Monday morning, social media campaigns that finally showed the beauty of the lodge instead of hiding its flaws. By month 4, bookings started climbing, guests were smiling again. Staff were laughing in the break room. Even the review section shifted from "avoid this place" to "a hidden gem in the Rockies." I remember one night, standing in the new lobby, with my hands on my hips, breathing in the scent of pine-scented candles and fresh espresso, thinking, I did it. I saved us. But deep down, a whisper asked, would they ever see it that way? Ryan started showing up more often once the hotel turned around. He'd stroll in mid-afternoon, nodding thoughtfully at the changes I made, tossing around buzzwords like guest journey and experience optimization. Then vanish again. At dinner, Dad would say things like, "Ryan's been thinking about revenue streams. He might be ready to take on more responsibility." I'd blink. "He hasn't even read the latest financials." Mom would cut in, "He has a different kind of vision, Claire. Don't be so rigid." Rigid. Detail-oriented. Uptight. That's what they saw. Not the woman who gave up her career, not the person who paid out of pocket to restock the bar, not the leader who revived a dying business. Just the girl who was always too much of something. Still, I kept going, because I believed, truly, that someday the results would speak louder than their perceptions. But standing in that lobby, watching Ryan smile as they handed him the title I had earned, I finally understood. It was never about results. It was about roles. And mine was never meant to lead. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that bit at your skin even under a thick coat. I pulled into the parking lot of Mountain Pine Lodge with a mental checklist already running: confirm breakfast orders, finalize next weekend's ski package, review the proposal for the lobby event space expansion. And then I walked in. The front desk was unmanned. The scent of overbrewed coffee lingered. A child was crying somewhere near the fireplace. And Ryan was in the lobby, firing Maria. Maria, who had worked with us for 15 years, Maria, who trained every new housekeeper, who once worked through Christmas Eve because we were understaffed, who brought homemade tamales for the team every December. That Maria. She's not flexible enough for the new schedule, Ryan said, voice casual like he was talking about changing the curtains. We need people who can adapt. What schedule? I asked. He shrugged, switching to on-call shifts. Saves money, cuts labor overhead. I read about it in a startup article. I stared at him. You're cutting staff during peak checkout times? Claire, he sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. Not everything is about spreadsheets and old systems. Sometimes you have to disrupt the model. Disrupt the model. That's what he called destroying morale and gutting the guest experience. I spent the rest of the day trying to fix the damage. I called Maria back into the office, apologized, promised to fight for her, but I could see it in her eyes, the humiliation, the growing doubt, like she didn't belong here anymore. That night I didn't go home. I drove. No destination, just roads. The mountains always calm me. There's something about the way the peaks cut through the sky, solid, unmoving, that makes everything else feel manageable. I passed the turnoff to town and kept going. I didn't even realize where I was heading until I saw it again. The Riverside Lodge. It stood quiet, forgotten. The once grand wooden beams now worn with time, windows dusty, shutters loose, and yet, still beautiful. Still proud, like something waiting to be chosen again. I parked. The for sale sign leaned forward as if urging me in. I sat in silence, staring at that old lodge. Then I leaned back in my seat and laughed, one of those tired, hollow laughs that sits just below a scream. What am I doing? What if I just walked away? Let Ryan have his kingdom of chaos and charm? Moved back to Chicago, started fresh? Maybe in a smaller hotel, maybe even in a different field. But the thought didn't comfort me. I didn't want to escape. I wanted to build. Something that was mine. Entirely mine. No more compromise. No more waiting for someone to hand me a crown they never intended to give. I picked up my phone and called Denise, my realtor back in Chicago. Claire, she answered sleepily. I need you to connect me with someone local. I'm looking at a property. It's old, it's broken, and it's perfect. There was a pause. You sound dangerous, she said with a laugh. I'm tired of being safe. That night, for the first time in months, I felt something click. Not snap, not break. Just click. It wasn't anger anymore, it wasn't grief, it was resolve. I didn't sleep. My brain buzzed with blueprints, concept themes, spa layouts. I saw the potential so clearly. A mountaintop escape, rooted in heritage, shaped by excellence, led by someone who actually gave a damn. By morning I had a viewing appointment scheduled. By the end of the week, I had wired the deposit. By the end of the month, I was holding a ring of keys in my hand, standing at the entrance of what used to be Riverside Lodge, soon to become something new entirely. A place where every detail would be mine, a place that wouldn't require permission or apology. They say when a door closes, a window opens, but no one tells you that sometimes you have to kick the damn window open yourself. The next few weeks passed in a blur of motion. Site visits, legal paperwork, calls with contractors, architects, lighting designers. I spent hours with city inspectors in hard hats and steel-toe boots, trying to convince them the cracked beams could be reinforced instead of replaced. At night, I sat on the floor of my temporary rental, surrounded by color swatches, fabric samples, and floor plans covered in scribbles and coffee stains. I was exhausted, and more alive than I'd felt in years. I named it The Summit. A little on the nose, maybe, but I wanted everyone to know exactly what I was reaching for. I wasn't trying to compete with Mountain Pine Lodge, I was aiming higher. Above the noise, beyond the doubt, toward something that was mine, wholly and without apology. I told no one at first, not even Sarah. I wasn't ready for the questions, or the pity, or worse, the condescension. I'd lived in the shadow of other people's expectations long enough. This time, I wanted silence, focus. Space to build, without judgment. Of course, in a town like ours, silence doesn't last. Whispers started before the first sign went up. Did you hear Claire bought the Riverside Lodge? Is she opening her own place? Is she competing with her own family? Yes. No, not exactly. All of it. None of it. The stories didn't matter. The work did. I was there every day, usually before sunrise. The place was a mess, rotted floorboards, outdated plumbing, cracked skylights that let snow fall straight into the old spa room. But it had good bones, a kind of quiet dignity that reminded me of, well, me. I handpicked my team. Some were locals, disillusioned by Ryan's reign at Mountain Pine. Others were contacts from my Chicago days, tough, loyal, and wildly talented. We worked in layers, clear the rubble, strip the rot, build again. There was a rhythm to it. Demolition, framing, wiring, painting, refining. Every day I walked through those halls watching something rise from the dust. Every night, I collapsed into bed and whispered to myself, "You're doing it. You're really doing it." But not everyone cheered. "Claire, how could you do this to us?" Mom said one evening, her voice trembling over the phone. "You're tearing the family apart." I stared at the wall of my rental kitchen, eyes burning. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "You did that when you gave my job to someone who didn't earn it." She gasped, but I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up. That was the beginning of the silence. No more family dinners, no more check-in calls, just space. Heavy, painful, necessary space. Meanwhile, Ryan's leadership at Mountain Pine was unraveling in slow motion. Their breakfast service was inconsistent. Online reviews dropped from glowing to hesitant to brutal. Staff turnover skyrocketed. Guests complained about delays, dirt, disorganization. Sarah texted me one day, 3 words, "Maria just quit." I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I got back to work. The summit's opening was set for exactly 6 months from the day I bought it. A silent promise I had made to myself in that cold parking lot. You have 6 months to rise. Opening week arrived like thunder. Loud, chaotic, electric. The phone rang off the hook. Local press called for interviews. I fielded dozens of emails from travel writers and influencers who had heard whispers of a revolutionary boutique concept in Aspen. Our first guest arrived 3 hours early. I checked her in myself. "You're the owner?" she asked, smiling at the sleek lobby with its floor-to-ceiling windows and locally carved wood centerpiece. "Yes," I replied. "Welcome to the summit." That night, the lobby buzzed with warmth. Candles flickering, glasses clinking, laughter rising above the soft jazz drifting through the sound system. I stood in the corner for a moment, watching it all unfold. "This is real," I thought. "You built this." And then I saw them, my parents. They walked through the doors slowly, eyes wide. Mom wore that tight, brittle smile she reserved for moments she didn't know how to handle. Dad's eyes scanned every corner of the room, taking it all in. The velvet textures, the curated scents, the soft lighting dancing against the mountain stone. And behind them Ryan. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned. He didn't say a word to me, just watched, tight-lipped, drowning in his own silence. "Congratulations," Mom said finally, her voice barely audible. "This is impressive." I nodded once. "Thank you." Ryan muttered something under his breath and turned away. As I stood behind the bar later that night, pouring a glass of wine for one of our first guests, I looked out across the room and felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not revenge, not pride. Freedom. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. Success has a strange way of turning up the volume on everything, both the applause and the whispers. Within weeks of the summit's opening, the town was buzzing. Travel blogs praised its seamless blend of rustic charm and luxury. Influencers posted glowing photos of the spa, the farm-to-table breakfasts, the panoramic views from the hot tubs carved into stone terraces. And the reviews? 5 stars. Across the board. Guests raved about the attentive service, the personal touches, the warmth of the staff. Many of those staff had once worn Mountain Pine uniforms. I didn't poach them. They came willingly. They were tired of chaos, of favoritism, of being overlooked. I gave them what they had always wanted: respect and a voice. But with success came scrutiny. Some in town couldn't decide if I was the hero or the villain in this family saga. Coffee shop conversations carried my name like perfume. Soft at first, then lingering. "She's bold, I'll give her that. I heard she stole staff. Well, someone had to do something. Ryan's been a disaster. It's just sad what happened to the Andersons." Sad. That was the word they kept using. Not unfair, not overdue, not deserved, just sad, as if I hadn't spent years being quietly dismissed, as if I hadn't earned every drop of success. And then came the Colorado Luxury Hotels Awards. I hadn't planned to attend. Too busy, I told myself, too many guests, too much to handle. But when the official email arrived, the summit is a finalist for Best New Boutique Hotel, I sat in silence for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and then I hit RSVP attending. The awards gala was held in a grand ballroom at a ski resort 2 hours away, crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, the kind of setting where people smiled too much and judged too quietly. I walked in wearing a deep green dress that made me feel both powerful and entirely myself. My team flanked me, Sarah in navy, Maria in wine red, the rest of our managers all radiant with pride. They believed in this, they believed in me. We sat near the front. As they began reading out the nominees, my pulse tapped a quiet rhythm against my wrist. And the winner for Best New Boutique Hotel. Time slowed. The summit. The room erupted. Hands clapped. My team stood and cheered. Sarah hugged me, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I walked up to the stage. The microphone felt cold against my fingers. I looked out over the sea of faces, and then I saw them. My parents. Tucked in the back row, half in shadow. Dad's hands were clasped, Mom's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And sitting beside them was an empty seat where Ryan should have been. He wasn't there. He hadn't attended industry events in months, said they were politics. Said he had better things to do. But I was here. I had always been here. I smiled, took a breath, and began. This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every team member who believed in the dream before it even had walls, to every guest who took a chance on something new, and to the place that taught me everything, Mountain Pine Lodge. It was there I learned the power of hospitality, the beauty of detail, and the courage to keep going when your voice feels small. There was a pause in the crowd, a subtle shift. They heard it, the message beneath the words. As I walked off the stage, a woman from Rocky Mountain Traveler pulled me aside. I want to do a feature, she said. Your story, the split, the rise, the transformation, it's exactly what people want to read. I nodded slowly. Only if we tell the whole truth. She smiled. That's the only kind worth telling. The article came out 3 weeks later. Against the Grain, how one woman reshaped the hospitality landscape in Aspen. It painted the summit as visionary, daring, heartfelt. It painted Mountain Pine Lodge as lost. The photos were brutal. Faded paint, half-filled dining rooms, quotes from ex-employees who had left under Ryan's management, and a closing paragraph that lingered in my mind. Sometimes legacy is not what you inherit, but what you rebuild, by hand, by heart, and by sheer will. The fallout was immediate. Town gossip turned into town reckoning. Vendors who once avoided me came knocking. Former critics asked for coffee just to chat. Even the local tourism board invited me to return, this time with a seat on the executive committee. I declined, not out of spite, out of peace. But the moment that truly stayed with me came one evening, just as the sun was bleeding gold over the horizon. I stood in the summit's event room watching Sarah rearrange centerpieces for a charity fundraiser. The room was humming with soft music and chatter, and then from the entrance I heard it, "Claire?" I turned. It was my mother. Alone. She looked smaller, older, softer. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded. We stepped outside. The air was cool. The pine trees whispered their usual secrets. "I read the article," she began. I figured. She smiled faintly. "I didn't know. I guess I didn't want to know how much we hurt you." I said nothing. "I just wanted you to come home. I didn't realize that when you did, we asked you to bury yourself." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get, and for once, it was enough. "I've stopped needing your approval, Mom," I said gently. "But it would be nice to have your respect." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "You have it." The applause fades, the cameras move on, and then there's silence. It's a beautiful kind of silence at first, the satisfying hush after the storm, the stillness that comes when everything you fought for finally settles into place. But silence has layers, and eventually, it becomes something else. Lonely. The summit was thriving. Occupancy rates were at an all-time high. We had expanded into hosting wellness retreats and off-season corporate getaways. Reviews kept pouring in, glowing and grateful. Travel magazines called us a blueprint for post-pandemic hospitality. Consultants emailed weekly asking for mentorship or franchise inquiries. On paper, everything looked perfect, and yet, I'd come home most nights to a quiet rental house, open the door and be greeted by no one. Just the soft creak of floorboards and the distant sound of wind threading through pine trees outside. At first, I filled the silence with work. I redesigned the outdoor garden space, spent evenings optimizing our guest feedback system, helped Maria restructure the housekeeping schedule for better flexibility. But slowly, the buzz began to feel hollow. One night, I sat alone in the staff lounge after everyone had gone home. The lights were dimmed, the fireplace still warm. A leftover bottle of champagne from the award gala sat open on the table. I poured a glass, took a sip, then another. And then I asked myself a question I hadn't dared voice before. Now that I've proven them wrong, what's left to prove? There was no bitterness in the question, just exhaustion, a quiet, echoing tiredness that seeped into my bones. I had climbed the mountain, I had planted my flag, but no one tells you what to do once you're up there, standing alone in the wind. A few weeks later, Sarah caught me staring out the lobby windows, my coffee long gone cold. "You look done," she said gently. I blinked. "I'm not, just tired." "Of the work?" "No," I said slowly. "Of being in fight mode all the time." She nodded. "Then maybe it's time to stop fighting." Her words hit harder than I expected. Maybe that's what this was all along. Me fighting for recognition, for space, for dignity. And now that I had it, maybe I didn't know how to live without the resistance. So I tried. I started small. I made time for old friends, reached out to Becca, who I hadn't seen since college. She drove in from Denver for brunch, and we sat on the terrace of the summit for hours, laughing about our dorm room disasters and late-night pizza runs. It felt like breathing for the first time in a long time. I joined a local book club, not because I had time, but because I needed something not connected to spreadsheets or reservation systems. I started hiking again, alone at first, then with others. I let myself rest, not just physically, but emotionally. I stopped performing competence every minute of every day. I let myself admit that I was tired, that I missed companionship, that I missed being known. One night, I stayed behind at the summit long after closing. The stars were out, brighter than I'd seen in years. I walked out to the balcony wrapped in a thick shawl, a glass of wine in hand. Below, the fire pit still crackled faintly. 2 guests lingered, speaking in hushed, happy tones. They didn't notice me, and I liked that. I sat down, listened to the trees, let the mountain air fill my lungs, and I whispered something to myself I hadn't dared say aloud in years. I want more than just success. I wanted joy, connection, softness, not instead of strength, but alongside it. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild. Not a hotel, but a life. I made amends with old friends I'd unintentionally pushed away during my tunnel-visioned climb. Some returned, some didn't, but I was proud of myself for trying. I began carving out space in my schedule that couldn't be filled with work. Time for community, creativity, and stillness. We hosted our first Summit community fundraiser for the local animal shelter. I danced with a stranger that night under fairy lights and forgot for a moment that I was the owner. I was just Claire. The staff noticed the shift. "You smile more lately," Maria said one morning. "I think I finally believe I'm allowed to," I replied. One afternoon, while walking through town, I passed Mountain Pine Lodge. It looked different, smaller, somehow. I stood across the street, watching a young couple struggle to carry their bags through the entrance. No doorman in sight. The lights were dimmer, the sign a little worn, but I didn't feel anger or pity, just distance. Like a chapter I'd finished reading a long time ago. It was about 3 weeks after we won the Regional Hospitality Award when the message came. A simple text from Dad. "Dinner at home? Just the 3 of us, Sunday." No explanation, no apology, just a summons, wrapped in softness. I stared at the screen for nearly an hour. I should have deleted it, or ignored it, or replied with something cold, clipped, final. But I didn't, because some part of me still wanted to believe they could change, that they could see me, not as the daughter who left, or the sister who competed, but as a woman who survived, who built, who grew. So I said yes. The house looked the same. Trim lawn, porch light humming faintly. The scent of Mom's rosemary chicken wafted through the screen door like a memory I hadn't asked for. Mom greeted me with a nervous smile, cheeks carefully rouged. Dad lingered in the living room, fiddling with his watch. a habit I'd inherited without realizing. We sat at the table, the same one where we'd celebrated birthdays, holidays, and, once, my acceptance letter to Cornell. That night, I remembered, Ryan had spilled juice on the envelope and cried until everyone forgot it was mine. Funny, the things we remember. Dinner was awkward. They asked about the weather, about new hires, about how the summit was adjusting to the influx of holiday bookings. I answered politely, mechanically. I was just finishing the last bite of salad when Dad cleared his throat. "Claire, we wanted to talk to you about the hotel. Here it comes." "Mountain Pine is struggling," he continued, "worse than we thought." Mom jumped in. "Ryan's overwhelmed. He's not saying it, but we can tell. The reviews are, you've seen them." I nodded once. They looked at each other, then back at me. "We were wondering," Dad said carefully, "if you'd consider helping him, not coming back necessarily, but guiding him, teaching him." My fork clinked against the plate as I set it down. "Like a consultant?" I asked. "Well," Mom said, her tone growing hopeful, "maybe something more hands-on, at least for a while until things stabilize." I leaned back in my chair, let the silence settle. "I offered to help a year ago," I said evenly. "I gave up my life in Chicago to do just that." "I know," Dad said, barely above a whisper, "and we didn't listen." "That's putting it mildly." Mom opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "You didn't just ignore me," I said. "You erased me. After everything I built, you gave it to him. You told me I was too rigid, too intense, too much." I looked at them both, no longer pleading, no longer hoping. Just stating facts. "And now you want me to fix what he broke." Mom's eyes shimmered. "We're not asking you to fix it all, just guide him." I shook my head. "You want me to hold his hand while he walks through a fire he lit himself." There was a long pause. Dad finally spoke. "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't come back. Not won't. Can't. Not if I wanted to protect everything I had rebuilt inside myself." "I'll give you advice if you want it," I added. "I can recommend systems, staff training strategies, guest experience playbooks. I'll even introduce you to consultants. But I won't step foot back into that place to clean up someone else's mess." Mom looked like she wanted to protest. But for once, she didn't. Instead, she just nodded, slowly, painfully. "I see." I rose from the table, my voice softer now. "I'm not angry anymore, truly. But I'm also not available for martyrdom." Driving home, I felt light. Not elated, not triumphant, just clear. For years I had operated from a place of proving I was worthy, proving I could do it, proving they were wrong. But saying no wasn't about proving anything, it was about protecting what I had built, not just in the summit, but in myself. The next few weeks brought distance. No more texts, no more awkward invitations, but also, no more wait. I saw Dad in town once, shopping for light bulbs. He smiled faintly. I returned it. And we kept walking. I heard Ryan had finally brought in a third-party management company, that he'd stepped down from daily operations to focus on the brand. Classic Ryan. The hotel limped on, a shadow of its former self, but it wasn't mine to save anymore. I had made peace with that. One snowy morning, I stood in the heart of the summit's lobby, watching the staff set up for our winter solstice retreat. The scent of cedarwood and orange peel drifted through the air. Guests arrived wrapped in scarves, cheeks flushed with cold. Sarah passed by with a clipboard and paused beside me. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled. "More than okay." "Look at this place," she said, glancing around. "It's magic." I nodded, heart full. "It's home. It's strange, the way healing happens. Not in a loud moment, not in some climactic hug or sudden realization, but in the quiet, the soft, almost imperceptible shift from hurting to okay." It was an early spring morning when I realized I wasn't holding my breath anymore. The sunlight spilled through the summit's grand windows in wide ribbons, painting everything in gold. Outside, the last patches of snow melted beneath the returning warmth. Guests were sipping coffee by the fireplace. Staff moved about with practiced ease, laughter weaving between them like background music, and I just stood there for a moment, coffee in hand, watching. Not managing. Not fixing. Just being. I'd built this, not just the walls and windows, but the spirit of the place. I had spent so long trying to earn a seat at someone else's table, when all along, I was meant to build my own. And I had. That afternoon, I returned to my office and opened the drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a folder labeled, Mountain Pine, Phase 1 Strategy. The plans I drafted back when I still believed they'd let me lead. I flipped through the pages, system diagrams, branding outlines, guest journey enhancements, notes scrawled in the margins, all the ideas that were dismissed, minimized, or ignored, and then, quietly, I picked it up, walked to the shredder, and fed it in. Page by page, not out of anger, but because I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need the proof. I didn't need the permission. I didn't need to keep carrying what had already been let go. That evening I sat by the fireplace in the guest library, journal open on my lap. And for the first time in years, I wrote something just for me. Not for the board, not for the press, not even for closure. Just a letter to the girl I had been. Dear Claire, I know you tried so hard, too hard sometimes. You twisted yourself into shapes no one asked for, just hoping someone would finally say, "You're enough." I'm here to tell you, you were always enough. Not because of what you accomplished, not because of the awards or the reviews or the walls you rebuilt, but because you kept going. You didn't let the silence shrink you. You didn't let rejection define you. You turned pain into purpose, and when no one handed you a place, you carved one out of stone and fire and mountain air. I'm proud of you, not just for what you built, but for finally learning that your worth was never theirs to give. With love, you. I closed the journal, took a breath. Outside, the mountains stood steady and quiet, their shadows long and patient, and for the first time in a long time I felt still. Not because I had nothing left to do, but because I no longer needed to outrun the past. I had walked through fire and come out whole. The summit's story would continue, new guests, new ideas, new seasons, but my story, it was finally my own. Not a daughter's redemption, not a sister's rebellion, not a fixer's frustration, just a woman, standing at her own summit, looking out into a future that was fully gloriously hers, and smiling.